Mary Carraway had been told her entire life she was nothing until the Duke's piercing gaze fell on her, and in an instant, everything changed. But how can someone who's been nothing for so long learn to accept being seen? And what is the price of that transformation? Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this historic romantic tale, I'd be so grateful for a like or a subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories of love, longing, and history. And if you're up for it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every note, and it always brings a smile to my face. Chapter 1. The Art of Disappearing. Victorian England, 1840. In the forgotten corner of Hartley House's walled garden, where wild roses tangled with neglected ivy in a riot of untamed beauty, Mary Carraway pressed herself against the cold stone wall. Her paint-stained fingers trembled as she tried to hide the canvas behind her back, but the afternoon sun was merciless, illuminating what she'd created, a burst of color and life that seemed to mock the gray existence her stepmother had prescribed for her. The painting showed the garden as it could be, roses in full bloom, paths cleared and welcoming, sunlight dancing through leaves in golden patterns. It was hope made visible, beauty captured in brushstrokes, everything her life was not, and it was forbidden. At 19, Mary had perfected the art of disappearing. She could move through rooms without disturbing the air, speak without being heard, exist without taking up space. Lady Selina had taught her well. You are nothing, you have nothing to offer. You are a burden we bear out of Christian charity. The words had been repeated so often, in so many variations, that they had become the foundation of Mary's understanding of herself. It was easier to believe what she was told, that her dreams were foolish, her art worthless, her very existence an imposition on those forced to tolerate her. Her auburn curls had escaped their loose, untidy braid, falling across her face as she worked. She pushed them back with the heel of her hand, leaving a smudge of blue paint across her temple. Her hazel eyes, which might have been lovely in different circumstances, carried a haunted look that came from years of learning to expect cruelty. Her frame was delicate, always had been, but there was a quiet strength in the way she held the paintbrush, as if in this one small rebellion she refused to be entirely conquered. The garden itself was a mirror of her state. Once carefully tended by her mother, it had been allowed to fall into beautiful chaos after her death. Lady Selina never came here, couldn't bear to, and that made it Mary's sanctuary, the only place she could breathe, the only place she could remember who she used to be before her father's death 3 years ago had changed everything. She was adding one final stroke of gold to capture the afternoon light when the voice cut through the garden's tranquility like a blade. What is that? Mary's heart stopped. The brush fell from her fingers, leaving a streak of gold across the grass. She spun around, canvas clutched to her chest, to find Lady Selina standing at the garden gate. At 45, her stepmother maintained her striking appearance through rigid discipline and fashionable dress. She was tall, with severe features that might have been handsome if they ever softened, but Mary couldn't remember them ever doing so, not toward her, at least. Selina's dark hair was arranged in an elegant updo without a single strand out of place. Her afternoon dress was immaculate despite the spring weather, and her piercing dark eyes held no warmth, no mercy, no kindness. Those eyes were fixed on the canvas Mary held, and the disgust in them was unmistakable. I was just, Mary stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Years of conditioning made her want to make herself smaller, to apologize, to disappear entirely. Have I not forbidden you this foolishness? Selina's voice was ice-given sound. She advanced into the garden with quick, angry steps, her fashionable boots crushing the small wildflowers that grew between the stones. This waste of paint, of canvas, of resources that could be better spent on Isla's wardrobe, on things that actually matter? I'm sorry, I only thought— You thought. Selina's laugh was sharp and cruel. That's your first mistake, Mary, thinking. You are here to serve, to be useful in the small ways you can manage, not to indulge in delusions of talent. She reached Mary and yanked the canvas from her hands. Mary made a small sound of protest but didn't resist. She never resisted anymore. Selina held the painting up, examining it with a sneer that made Mary's stomach turn. What is this supposed to be? The garden, Mary whispered. How it could look if what? If we wasted time and money on meaningless beauty? If we catered to your romantic nonsense? Selina's grip on the canvas tightened. You paint fantasies, Mary, because you cannot face reality. The reality is that you are my late husband's burden, thrust upon me when he died. The reality is that you contribute nothing of value to this household. The reality is that every shilling spent on your upkeep is a shilling taken from Eyre, who actually has prospects, who actually has worth. Each word was a practiced blow, delivered with precision to the places that hurt most. Mary felt herself shrinking, felt the small spark of joy the painting had given her, guttering out like a candle in a storm. Your father would be ashamed, Selina continued, her voice dropping to something almost conversational, which somehow made it worse. He had such hopes for you when your mother was alive. But you've disappointed everyone, haven't you? No grace, no beauty, no accomplishments worth mentioning. Just this, she shook the canvas, this pathetic waste of time. Mary's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. Not here, not in front of Selina. She had learned that tears only made it worse, gave her stepmother something else to mock. I'll put everything away, Mary managed, her voice barely audible. I won't paint again, I promise. Won't you? Selina's smile was terrible. I've heard that before, Mary. You're deceitful, you see, sneaking about, hiding your little rebellions. Well, not this time. With one sharp motion, Selina tore the canvas across its center. Mary gasped, the sound involuntary, as if she'd been struck. She watched as her stepmother tore the painting again, and again, reducing it to strips of ruined canvas and destroyed color. The garden she'd painted with such hope, the light she'd tried to capture, all of it reduced to refuse in Selina's elegant hands. Gather the pieces, Selina commanded. Take them to the kitchen fire and burn them. I want to watch. The walk to the kitchen was endless. Mary's hands shook as she collected the torn canvas pieces, smearing paint across her simple dress. She could feel Selina's presence behind her like a physical weight, driving her forward through the garden gate, across the courtyard, into the servants' entrance. In the kitchen, the cook and two maids fell silent as they entered. Mary saw pity in their eyes, but no one spoke. No one ever spoke. Lady Selina controlled everything in this house, and crossing her meant dismissal without references. Mary couldn't blame them for their silence. She'd grown used to being alone. The kitchen fire was bright and hot. Mary knelt before it, the torn pieces of her painting in her hands. Selina stood over her, waiting. Burn them, she commanded. Mary's hands wouldn't move. The painting had been the only beautiful thing in her world, the only proof that somewhere inside her, something still lived. To burn, it felt like burning the last piece of herself that remembered how to hope. Now, Mary, one by one, she fed the pieces to the flames. She watched the colors catch fire, brilliant for a moment, before turning to ash. The gold light she'd painted last transformed to orange flame, then smoke, then nothing. When the last piece was gone, Mary remained kneeling, staring at the fire, feeling hollow. Good, Selina said. Now, to ensure this doesn't happen again. She turned to the cook. Dispose of any painting supplies you find in this house. All of them. Yes, my lady, the cook murmured. Selina looked back at Mary. You have other concerns to occupy you now. Duke David Howard will be visiting Hartley House in 3 days' time. Mary looked up, surprised despite herself. The Duke of Wellington was England's most eligible bachelor, sought after by every ambitious mother in London. The idea that he would visit their modest estate seemed impossible. He's expressed interest in meeting Eyre, Selina continued, and her voice warmed with satisfaction when she spoke her daughter's name. This is the opportunity we've been waiting for. Eyre will be presented at her absolute best. The house will be perfect. And you, she looked down at Mary with cold precision, will remain in your chambers. You will be invisible. You will not be seen by His Grace under any circumstances. Do you understand? Yes, stepmother. If he should somehow encounter you, you will claim to be unwell and excuse yourself immediately. I will not have you embarrassing this family in front of the Duke. I will not have your presence diminishing Eyre's prospects. I understand. Do you? Selina's eyes narrowed. Because this is everything, Mary. Everything I've worked for since your father's death. Eyre deserves a brilliant marriage, a title, a future, and you will not ruin it with your moping, your foolishness, or your very existence. You will be a ghost in this house. Do you understand? A ghost. Yes, stepmother. Good. Now clean yourself up. You look like a chimney sweep. Selina turned on her heel and left, her footsteps echoing on the stone floor. Mary remained kneeling by the fire until she heard movement behind her. She turned to see Gregory, the butler, standing in the doorway. He was 40 years old, with greying hair and a stern expression that usually kept the other servants in line. But when he looked at Mary, his eyes held something different. Something almost like kindness. He approached quietly, offering her a clean handkerchief. "For your face, Miss Mary." She took it with shaking hands, wiping at the paint and tears she hadn't realized were there. "Thank you, Gregory. Your father," he said quietly, glancing toward the door to ensure they were truly alone, "would have been proud of what you created today." Mary looked up at him, startled. "How would you know?" "Because I knew him, miss, knew him well, and I know he wanted you to paint, wanted you to pursue the gift your mother passed to you." His expression was sad. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect it." Before Mary could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with the dying fire and the ashes of her painting. That night, in her small chamber in the East Wing, far from the family rooms, far from anywhere guests might wander, Mary sat at her window, staring out at the darkened garden. Her hands still bore traces of paint beneath the nails, blue and gold and green, evidence of her crime. Evidence that for a few hours she had been something more than nothing. She shouldn't have painted. She knew the rules. She knew what happened when she forgot her place, when she dared to want something, to create something, to be something. But as she stared at her stained fingers, a small, dangerous thought whispered through her mind. What if Gregory is right? What if father would have been proud? She had a memory, faint but precious, of her father in his study. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. He had shown her his own watercolors, landscapes he'd painted in his youth, and had said, "You have your mother's eye for beauty, Mary. Never lose that. Never let anyone convince you the world isn't worth capturing on canvas." Mary rose from her window and moved to the loose floorboard beside her bed. She'd discovered it years ago, had hidden small treasures there when she was younger. Now she pried it up carefully and pulled out the small leather case she'd concealed there months ago. Inside was a single piece of paper, a tiny set of watercolors she'd stolen from the rubbish before they could be thrown away, and one fine brush with only a few bristles left. She shouldn't keep them. Selina had ordered all painting supplies destroyed. If these were found, the punishment would be severe. But Mary carefully wrapped the case in an old handkerchief and placed it back in its hiding place. She didn't know why she was keeping it. She wasn't brave enough to defy Selina again. She wasn't strong enough to believe she was anything more than she'd been told she was. But somewhere, in some small part of herself that wasn't entirely crushed, something whispered, "Not yet. Don't give up yet." She replaced the floorboard and returned to her narrow bed. In 3 days, the Duke would arrive. In 3 days, Eyre would be presented like a prize, beautiful and accomplished, and everything a duke could want. In 3 days, Mary would hide in her chamber, invisible and forgotten, exactly as she should be. But tonight, with paint still staining her fingers, Mary allowed herself one last thought before sleep claimed her. For one afternoon, I existed. For one afternoon, I created something beautiful, and somehow that terrifies me more than disappearing ever had. Because if she could exist for one afternoon, what did that mean about all the others? What did that say about the nothing she'd been told she was? In 3 days, everything would change. But Mary didn't know that yet. She only knew that somewhere beneath the weight of years of cruelty, something in her refused to be entirely extinguished. And that small, stubborn spark would prove more dangerous than anyone, least of all Mary herself, could possibly imagine. Chapter 2. The Duke's Arrival. 3 days had transformed Hartley House from its usual quiet order into barely contained chaos. Servants rushed through corridors with fresh linens and flowers. The cook had been working since dawn on elaborate preparations, and every surface gleamed with frantic polishing. In the midst of it all, Lady Selina orchestrated the preparations like a general commanding troops, her voice sharp and her standards impossible. In Eyre's chambers, 3 maids worked to transform the already beautiful 17-year-old into something approaching perfection. Her blonde hair was being arranged in an elaborate style that had taken the lady's maid 2 hours to master. Her dress, pale blue silk that brought out her eyes, had been fitted and refitted until it displayed her figure to exact advantage. Selina stood watching, circling her daughter like a jeweler, examining a precious stone. "Remember," Selina instructed for perhaps the 20th time, "compliment his taste, but don't be obsequious. Laugh at his wit, but not too loudly. Show accomplishment, but not so much that you seem intimidating. You must be perfect, Eyre, perfect in every way." "Yes, mother," Isla murmured, though her reflection in the mirror looked strained. She had barely slept, kept awake by the memory of Mary kneeling before the kitchen fire, burning her painting while their mother watched with satisfaction. Meanwhile, in the servants' quarters below stairs, Mary knelt on the cold stone floor with a rag and silver polish, her hands raw and aching. She had been given every tarnished piece of silver in the house to clean work that would normally be divided among 3 maids. Her simple dress was already stained with polish, her auburn hair fell in untidy wisps around her face, and her stomach ached with hunger. She'd been given only porridge at dawn, nothing since. "You will remain here," Selina had told her that morning, her voice cold as winter frost. "You will work, you will be useful in the only way you can be, and you will not, under any circumstances, show yourself where the Duke might see you. Do you understand?" "Yes, stepmother. If I discover you've disobeyed, if I find you've attempted to draw attention to yourself, there will be consequences far worse than anything you've experienced before." Mary had believed her. She always believed her. So she polished silver and tried not to think about the Duke arriving upstairs, tried not to wonder what it would be like to be Isla, dressed in silk, and waiting for a man who might change her entire life. Mary's life would never change. She understood that now. This was all she was, all she would ever be, invisible, useful only in the most menial ways, a burden to be hidden. The sound of carriage wheels on gravel echoed through the house just past noon. Mary heard the sudden flurry of activity, footsteps rushing, doors opening, Selina's voice calling final instructions. She bent her head lower over the silver teapot she was polishing and told herself she didn't care. She told herself it didn't matter. She almost believed it. Duke David Howard stepped from his carriage and surveyed Hartley House with the practiced eye of a man who had seen countless estates. It was handsome enough, well-maintained gardens, dignified architecture, the kind of moderately prosperous holding that suggested old money, carefully preserved. Nothing remarkable, but nothing objectionable either. Rather like this entire visit, he thought wearily. At 28, David had grown accustomed to the weight of his title. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark brown hair curling slightly at the edges, despite his valet's best efforts to tame it. His blue eyes were piercing, capable of freezing lesser men with a glance, though he'd been told they could warm considerably when he chose. His strong jaw was clean-shaven, his tailored coat spoke of wealth without ostentation, and he carried himself with the confidence of a man who had never doubted his place in the world. But beneath the polished exterior lay a profound weariness. Another estate visit, another carefully orchestrated introduction to another accomplished young lady, another mother's transparent machinations, another performance where everyone knew their roles, and no one spoke truth. He was so tired of performances. Lady Selina Caraway greeted him at the entrance with a curtsy so deep it bordered on theatrical. "Your Grace, what an immense honor you do our humble home. Please, come in, come in." David followed her into a drawing room that had clearly been arranged with great care. Fresh flowers in crystal vases, tea service laid out with precision, and standing beside the window in a shaft of afternoon light, clearly positioned for maximum effect, stood Miss Isla Caraway. She was beautiful, David acknowledged, genuinely so. Golden hair, striking blue eyes, a figure that her silk dress displayed to advantage. She curtsied with perfect grace, her smile practiced but not unpleasant. "Your Grace," she said, her voice musical and carefully modulated, "we're so honored by your visit." "Miss Caraway," David bowed. "The honor is mine." What followed was exactly what David had expected. Isla poured tea with elegant precision. She discussed the weather with intelligent observations. She mentioned, as if in passing, her watercolor paintings and her skill at the pianoforte. She laughed at his mild jests with exactly the right degree of amusement, not too much, not too little. She was perfect, utterly, completely perfect. And David felt absolutely nothing. He made appropriate responses, asked polite questions, played his role in the elaborate dance of courtship, but his mind wandered. His eyes drifted to the windows, to the gardens beyond, to anything that might offer relief from the suffocating predictability of it all. "The gardens at Hartley House are quite celebrated locally," Lady Selina was saying. "The roses, in particular, are exceptional this time of year." David seized the opportunity. "Might we walk through them? I confess I find gardens more enlightening than drawing rooms for understanding an estate's character." A flicker of something panic crossed Selina's face before she recovered. Of course. What a delightful idea. Isla, fetch your parasol. We'll show His Grace the grounds. The formal gardens were indeed well maintained, if conventional. Geometric beds of roses, carefully trimmed hedges, gravel paths that crunched pleasantly underfoot. Selina kept up a steady commentary about plantings and improvements, while Isla walked at David's side, her parasol shading her perfect complexion. David made appropriate sounds of interest, but privately thought he'd seen dozens of gardens just like this. There was competence here, but no passion, order without soul. They were passing along a tall hedgerow when David glimpsed movement through a gap in the greenery. He paused, looking more carefully. Beyond the formal gardens lay what appeared to be an older, wilder space, a walled garden that had been allowed to grow more freely, where roses tangled with ivy and wildflowers bloomed between stones. And there, kneeling beside a patch of wild roses, was a young woman. She was absorbed in something, completely unaware of being observed. Her auburn hair had escaped whatever arrangement it had been in and fell in curls around her face. Her dress was simple, even shabby, with paint stains visible on the fabric. Her hands moved with quiet intensity, and David realized with surprise that she was painting on what appeared to be a scrap of paper with a tiny brush and a child's watercolor set. But it was her expression that arrested him. She was transformed, radiant, utterly alive in a way that made Isla's practiced beauty seem like a painted portrait beside living flesh. Here was someone who had forgotten to perform, forgotten to be anything but genuinely, authentically herself. David found he couldn't look away. "Who is that young lady in the walled garden?" he asked. Selina's response was immediate and dismissive. "Merely the stepdaughter, Your Grace. My late husband's child from his first marriage. She helps with household tasks." "She paints," David observed. "A hobby," Selina said tightly. "Nothing of consequence. She's of a rather delicate constitution, I'm afraid. Not suited for society. She appears quite healthy at the moment." Selina's smile was strained. "She has good days and bad, Your Grace. One never knows when her nervous condition might manifest." David looked at Selina properly then, noting the tension in her posture, the calculation in her eyes. Something was wrong here, something beyond the usual social maneuvering. "I should like to meet her," he said. "Perhaps she might join us for tea." "I'm afraid that's impossible. Your Grace." Selina's voice had taken on a note of steel beneath the honey. "Miss Mary is indisposed today. Her constitution, you understand. The excitement of your visit has quite overwhelmed her delicate nerves. It would be unwise to tax her further." "She appears to be painting in the garden," David pointed out mildly. "Fresh air and quiet solitude, Your Grace. The doctor's orders. Company would agitate her condition." David recognized a wall when he encountered one. He allowed Selina to redirect his attention back to Isla, to the formal gardens, to the perfectly orchestrated tour. But his mind remained in that wild garden, with a girl whose face had lit with joy over a scrap of paper and a child's paint set. In the walled garden, Mary was carefully adding detail to a wild rose when Gregory's voice made her jump. "Miss Mary, you should return inside. The Duke is touring the gardens with your stepmother." Mary's heart hammered. She'd been so absorbed in capturing the exact shade of pink where sunlight hit the petals that she'd forgotten everything else. "Did they see me?" "I don't know, miss." Gregory's expression was troubled. "But it would be best if you weren't visible. You know how her ladyship—" "Yes." Mary quickly gathered her supplies, tucking the paper and paints into her apron pocket. "I know, but she wasn't quick enough." Selina found her in the kitchen corridor, saw the paint-stained apron, and her face went white with fury. "My chambers," she hissed. "Now." The explosion of rage that followed was worse than anything Mary had experienced before. Selina tore the painting from Mary's hands, ripped the supplies from her apron, and slapped her hard enough to leave Mary's ears ringing. "You deliberate, scheming little wretch." Selina's voice shook with fury. "I gave you explicit instructions. I told you to remain out of sight. But you couldn't help yourself, could you? You had to try to draw attention, to make yourself visible, to ruin everything I've worked for." "I didn't know anyone would see," Mary gasped, her cheek burning. "I was just trying to seduce the Duke's attention away from Isla. Don't think I don't see your scheme, Mary. Don't think I don't understand what you're attempting. I wasn't—" "Silence." Selina grabbed Mary's arm, her nails digging in hard enough to bruise. "You will go to your chamber. You will remain there, locked in, For the duration of the Duke's visit, you will receive bread and water, nothing more. And if I hear so much as a footstep from you, if you make a single sound that might remind anyone of your existence, I will send you away from this house forever. Do you understand me?" "Yes, stepmother," Mary whispered. "You are nothing, Mary. Nothing. You embarrass this family with your very existence. The Duke must never see you again." In her small chamber, with the lock clicking ominously behind her, Mary sank onto her narrow bed and touched her throbbing cheek. Through her thin door, she could hear the sounds of the house continuing its preparations, could hear Eyre's light footsteps in the corridor, could hear Selina's voice commanding servants. She pulled the torn scrap of her painting from her pocket. Selina had ripped it, but not completely destroyed it. Half a wild rose remained, painted in the moment before Gregory had warned her. Mary traced the painted petals with one finger, remembering how it had felt to create something beautiful. For those few minutes in the garden, she had forgotten to be nothing. She had simply been, and somewhere in this house, a duke with piercing blue eyes was wondering who she was. In the guest chambers, David stood at the window, unable to shake the image of the girl in the garden. He'd gone through the motions of tea, had listened to Eyre play the pianoforte with competent precision, had made appropriate sounds of admiration. But his mind kept returning to that glimpse of authentic joy, of genuine passion, of a woman who had forgotten to perform. Merely the stepdaughter, of no consequence. Lady Selina's words rang hollow. A young woman who could find such joy in creation, who could transform in that way, was not inconsequential. And the speed with which Selina had dismissed her, the obvious lie about her health, the careful redirection, all of it suggested something more than simple social maneuvering. David made his decision. "Lord Pemberton," he said to his secretary, "send word to Hartley House that I'll be extending my visit. Business in the area requires my attention for at least a week." "Business, Your Grace?" "Yes," David said, still looking out the window toward where he imagined the walled garden lay. "Important business." The Duke of Wellington was accustomed to getting what he wanted. And what he wanted, he was beginning to realize, was to know the truth about Mary Carraway. The girl with paint-stained hands who had looked, for one brief moment, like the most alive person he'd ever seen. The girl Lady Selina was so desperate to hide. The girl described as of no consequence, who had, in the space of a single glimpse, become the most consequential thing in the world. Chapter 3. The Forbidden Meeting. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when David made his announcement over breakfast. "Lady Selina, I hope it won't inconvenience you, but I find I must extend my visit. Business matters in the area require my attention for at least 3 more days." Selina's teacup froze halfway to her lips. For a heartbeat, David saw naked calculation flash across her face before she recovered with a brilliant smile. "Your Grace, what a delightful surprise. Of course, you must stay as long as you require. We're honored by your continued presence." But David had learned to read people in the diplomatic circles of London, and he saw what lay beneath her pleased words. Opportunity. Yes, more time to parade Eyre before him, but also anxiety. More time meant more chances for whatever she was hiding to be discovered. "Eyre will be so pleased," Selina continued, reaching across to squeeze her daughter's hand. "Won't you, dear?" "Of course, Mother." Eyre's smile was perfect, but David caught something in her eyes. Discomfort? Doubt? It vanished too quickly for him to be certain. After breakfast, David noticed the change immediately. Servants who had previously moved freely through the house now walked with hunched shoulders and furtive glances. The cheerful cook who had hummed while arranging breakfast fell silent when Selina passed. And somewhere in this house, he knew, Mary Carraway was being kept even more carefully hidden. The thought made his jaw tighten. David had always been patient when pursuing information. In Vienna, during delicate negotiations, he'd learned that indirect questions often yielded more than direct confrontation. So he began, carefully, casually, asking servants about the house's history as he wandered its corridors. "The late Mr. Carraway, he was fond of art, I understand." "Yes, Your Grace," a young maid answered nervously. "Very fond, sir. He painted himself." "He did." "Did he teach his children?" The maid's eyes darted toward the stairs where Selina's voice could be heard. I couldn't say, Your Grace." But her fear told him everything. Gregory, the butler, proved more interesting. David caught him watching not with a servant's deference, but with the careful assessment of a man weighing another's character. When their eyes met, something passed between them. An understanding, perhaps, or a challenge. "Gregory," David said quietly when they were alone in the library, "how long have you served this household?" 20 years, Your Grace. I came when the first Mrs. Carroway was still alive. You knew Miss Mary as a child then." A pause. "I did, Your Grace. And what sort of child was she?" Gregory's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Bright, Your Grace, full of life and questions. She had her mother's gift for seeing beauty in everything. Mr. Carroway doted on her." "Had?" David emphasized the past tense. "Things change, Your Grace." Gregory's eyes held David steadily. "Not always for the better." It was as close to an accusation as a servant could make about his employer. David understood he'd found an ally. That afternoon, pleading the need for fresh air after another tedious conversation about Eyre's watercolors, competent but utterly lifeless, David excused himself for a solitary walk. His feet carried him inevitably toward the walled garden. It was wilder than the formal grounds, more honest somehow. Roses bloomed in chaotic profusion, and the overgrown paths spoke of neglect. But there was beauty here that the manicured gardens lacked the beauty of nature, allowed to express itself. Behind a particularly overgrown section of roses, David discovered a small wooden shed. Its door hung slightly ajar, as if inviting exploration. He glanced back toward the house, no one watching, and slipped inside. The dim interior smelled of old wood and turpentine. As his eyes adjusted, David's breath caught. Canvases were stacked against every wall, dozens of them, perhaps more. He pulled one forward into the light from the doorway and found himself staring at Hartley House as he'd never seen it, transformed by an artist's vision into something luminous, alive with possibility. The windows glowed with warmth, the gardens bloomed with impossible color, and the entire scene seemed to pulse with hope. He examined another, a portrait of a man, Mary's father, surely captured with such love and detail that David could see the kindness in his eyes, the slight sadness around his mouth. This was not the work of an amateur dabbling in hobby painting. This was genuine talent, raw and powerful. A landscape showed the walled garden at sunset, light streaming through the roses in shafts of gold. Another depicted the view from what must be Mary's window, bare and simple, but rendered with such honesty that David felt the loneliness of it in his chest. These paintings revealed a soul yearning for beauty, for freedom, for connection, and they were hidden here, forbidden, as if their very existence was shameful. "Your Grace." David turned to find Gregory standing in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. "These belong to Miss Mary," the butler said quietly. "Her ladyship doesn't know I've kept them. She ordered them all destroyed years ago." "Destroyed?" David's anger, simmering since yesterday, began to boil. Why in God's name would anyone destroy work like this? Because it reminded Lady Selina of what she could never be. Gregory stepped inside, lowering his voice further. "The first Mrs. Carroway was an artist, Your Grace, a talented one. Mr. Carroway loved her deeply. Some say he never fully recovered from her death. When he remarried, Lady Selina tried to take her place, but—" He gestured at the paintings. "Miss Mary inherited her mother's gift. Every brushstroke reminded Lady Selina that she was second choice, that she was loved less. So she punishes the child for the mother's crime of being loved? Cruelty has its own logic, Your Grace." David carefully returned the painting to its place. "Mr. Carroway, what were his wishes for Mary's education?" "He left explicit instructions, Your Grace. Mary was to study art, to have proper training, to pursue her gift. He left funds specifically designated for it." Gregory's jaw tightened. "Lady Selina burned those documents, but I kept copies. Letters, his journal, everything I could preserve. I've been waiting for the right person to— To what? Help her? To see the truth, Your Grace. To care enough to act." David met the butler's eyes. "I see it, and I will act." An hour later, Gregory found Mary in the kitchen where she'd been scrubbing pots since dawn. Her hands were raw, her dress soaked with dishwater, her face hollow with hunger and exhaustion. "Miss Mary," Gregory said quietly, "I need you to gather herbs from the walled garden, chamomile and lavender. The cook requires them for tonight's dinner." Mary's eyes widened with fear. "But I'm not supposed to leave the kitchen," Lady Selina said. "Her ladyship has gone to the village with Miss Eyre. They won't return for an hour at least." Gregory's expression softened. "Go, child. Take your paints with you. You have time." "Gregory, if she finds out, then I'll bear the consequences. But you deserve 1 hour of freedom, Miss Mary. 1 hour to breathe. Mary's hands trembled as she retrieved the tiny paint set hidden in her apron pocket. She knew this was dangerous, knew the punishment would be severe if she was caught. But Gregory's kindness, rare and precious, made refusal impossible. The walled garden wrapped around her like an embrace. Mary knelt beside the wild roses, found a scrap of paper in her pocket, and began to paint with hands that shook from more than just hunger. The afternoon sun was warm on her back, and for these stolen minutes, she could pretend she was still the girl her father had believed her to be. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear footsteps on the path. "Please don't go." Mary's head snapped up. The Duke stood a few feet away, his expression gentle but intense. Her heart hammered. She should flee. She should hide. Lady Selina's words echoed in her mind. "You are nothing. You embarrass this family. I've been hoping to meet you properly," David continued, his voice carefully calm, as if speaking to a frightened animal. "I'm David Howard, and you're Mary Carraway." Mary scrambled to her feet, the paper and paints falling from her lap. She couldn't meet his eyes. "Your Grace, I shouldn't be here. I'm supposed to be gathering herbs for the cook." "Yes, I know." A hint of amusement touched his voice. Gregory mentioned it, rather pointedly, in fact. Gregory? Understanding dawned, and with it, fresh terror. "Oh no, if Lady Selina discovers he helped me, then we'll make sure she doesn't discover it." David gestured to the stone bench nearby. "Please, sit. I'd like to talk with you, if you'll permit it." Mary remained standing, every instinct screaming at her to run. But something in his eyes, genuine interest, not pity or curiosity, held her frozen. "I don't understand, Your Grace. Why would you want to speak with me?" "Because yesterday, I saw a young woman transformed by creative passion. Today, I found paintings that reveal remarkable talent, and I'd like to understand why someone with such gifts has been described to me as of no consequence." His words struck something deep inside her. Mary's throat tightened. "Because I am of no consequence. Lady Selina is right. I have nothing to offer, no accomplishments worth." "I've seen your work, Mary." David's interruption was gentle but firm. "That's not the creation of someone with nothing to offer." Mary finally looked up at him, and the genuine belief in his face made her breath catch. No one had looked at her that way since her father died. No one had seen her as anything more than a burden in years. "Would you show me what you see?" David asked, gesturing to the garden around them. "When you look at this place, what do you see?" "I don't understand. The colors, the light, the way you would capture it if you were painting. I saw your work in the shed. The way you see the world is extraordinary. I'd like to understand it." No one had ever asked her opinion on anything. No one had cared what she thought, what she saw, what she felt. The question itself was so foreign that Mary couldn't immediately process it. She looked at the roses, at the way afternoon sun caught their petals, transforming them from simple flowers into something luminous. Despite herself, despite her fear, words began to flow. "The light is different at this time of day, more golden, warm. It makes the pink roses look like they're lit from within, and the shadows, they're not black, they're blue and purple and green all mixed together. Most people paint shadows as empty spaces, but they're full of color if you look carefully." As she spoke, something shifted. She forgot for a moment to be afraid, forgot to feel worthless, forgot everything except the joy of describing what she saw. Her hands moved as she talked, sketching the shapes in the air, and her face, David noted with satisfaction, transformed the way it had when he'd first glimpsed her. "That's remarkable," he said quietly. "The way you see." Mary's words stopped abruptly. The mask fell back into place. "I shouldn't have said so much. Forgive me, Your Grace. I was Mary." She flinched at his sharp voice. Selina stood at the garden gate, her face white with fury, barely contained beneath a veneer of concern. "What are you doing out of your chamber? You were meant to be resting." "I asked Gregory to send her for herbs," David said smoothly, rising to his feet. "I expressed interest in the medicinal plants in the garden, and he kindly arranged for Miss Carraway to show me." "But her condition," Selina hurried forward, her hands reaching for Mary as if to restrain a wayward child. "Forgive her, Your Grace. She becomes confused when her illness strikes. She doesn't understand the impropriety of—" "Lady Selina." David's voice carried the full weight of his authority. "I found our conversation quite enlightening. Miss Carraway has a remarkable perspective on art and nature. Far more sophisticated than I'd expected. Selina's smile was rigid. You're too kind, Your Grace, but Mary really should return to her chambers. Her health. I should like to continue our discussion, David interrupted. Perhaps at dinner tonight. I'd be honored if Miss Carroway joined us. The silence that followed was thunderous. Mary stood frozen, waiting for Selina's rejection, for the inevitable excuse that would return her to invisibility. But Selina was trapped. To refuse a duke's direct request would be unconscionably rude. To agree meant allowing Mary at the dinner table, risking whatever attention that might draw. Of course, Your Grace, she finally managed, her voice strangled. If you believe Mary's health will permit it, I'm certain it will. David's smile was pleasant, but his eyes were hard. After all, she seems quite well at the moment. He turned to Mary, who stood pale and shaking. Until tonight then, Miss Carroway. I look forward to our continued conversation. Back in her chamber, Mary sat on her bed and trembled. Selina hadn't struck her, couldn't, with the Duke in the house, but the promise of future punishment hung in the air like a storm about to break. A soft knock came at her door. Gregory entered carrying a tray with actual food, bread, cheese, cold meat, and something wrapped in cloth. From Miss Eyre's wardrobe, he said, laying the bundle on the bed. A dress her ladyship put aside. It should fit you well enough. Gregory, what have you done? Mary whispered. When Lady Selina discovers you helped arrange, I did what your father would have wanted, Miss Mary. Gregory's expression was resolute. The Duke is a good man. I've watched him these past days. He sees what others don't. Sees you. After he left, Mary unwrapped the dress. It was simple compared to Eyre's usual finery, pale green muslin. Nothing elaborate, but to Mary it might as well have been a queen's gown. She hadn't worn proper evening dress in 3 years. She stood before her small mirror as the afternoon light faded, hardly recognizing the young woman staring back. In the dress, with her hair arranged as best she could manage, she looked almost like the girl she used to be, the girl her father had loved, the girl who had believed she might have value. The Duke sees something in me, she thought, hope and terror warring in her chest. But what if Lady Selina is right? What if I am nothing, and he simply hasn't realized it yet? Down the corridor, in Eyre's chambers, the younger girl sat at her window watching the walled garden. She'd seen the entire encounter, her mother's fury, the Duke's protection of Mary, the way her half-sister had briefly come alive while talking about art. All her life, Eyre had been told she was the beautiful one, the accomplished one, the daughter worthy of pride. Mary was nothing a burden, an embarrassment, someone to be hidden, but the Duke, the most eligible man in England, had looked at Mary with genuine interest, had requested her presence at dinner, had protected her from their mother's wrath. What did that mean about everything Eyre had been taught? For the first time in her 17 years, Eyre began to question. In the guest chambers, David stood at his window, staring toward the garden, fury and determination coursing through his veins. He'd witnessed cruelty before the Tun was full of it, masked behind propriety and social graces. But this was systematic psychological destruction. A young woman of remarkable talent, convinced she was worthless. A gift deliberately crushed. Years of abuse disguised as concern for delicate health, and tonight he would begin to dismantle it. As evening fell, Mary stood before her mirror one final time. Her hands shook as she touched the dress, as she tried to smooth her hair, as she prepared to be seen. Tonight, she would sit at her stepmother's table. Tonight, she would be visible to the Duke, to society, to the world that had been denied her. And Mary didn't know if that was salvation or destruction. She only knew that, for the first time in 3 years, someone had asked her opinion, had valued her perspective, had seen her as something more than nothing. That terrified her more than any punishment Selina could devise. Because if the Duke was wrong, if she truly was worthless, then this brief glimpse of being seen would make her return to invisibility unbearable. But if he was right, Mary didn't dare finish that thought. She descended the stairs toward dinner, toward whatever fate awaited, with Gregory's words echoing in her mind. Your father would be so proud. Chapter 4. The Dinner of Revelations. Selina had spent the afternoon orchestrating her revenge with the precision of a general planning battle. If the Duke insisted on Mary's presence at dinner, then dinner would become the stage for Mary's complete humiliation. By evening's end, His Grace would see exactly what Selina had always known, that Mary Carroway was nothing, and any interest in her was misplaced charity. The dining room glittered with crystal and silver. Selina had invited the Pembrokes' old money, sharp tongues, impeccable social standing, and the Hastings, whose wife was known for her cutting observations about young ladies' deficiencies. 8 guests in total, enough to make the evening feel like an event, enough to witness Mary's failure. The seating arrangement was Selina's masterpiece. The Duke at the head of the table, naturally, with Eyre to his right in a position of honor. Mary was placed at the far end, squeezed between Mrs. Hastings and Colonel Pembroke, both of whom Selina had carefully primed with concerned whispers about Mary's delicate nerves and unfortunate tendencies toward confusion. "We must be patient with her," Selina had confided. "The poor girl has never quite recovered from her father's death. So fragile, you understand." Everything was perfect. Everything was controlled. And then Mary entered the dining room. The green muslin dress was simple compared to the elaborate gowns of the other ladies, but it fit Mary's slender frame beautifully, bringing out the unusual hazel of her eyes. Gregory had helped her arrange her auburn hair in a style that was modest but elegant, and the overall effect was of understated grace. The conversations around the table faltered. Heads turned. "Good heavens, Selina," Mrs. Pembroke said, her eyebrows raised. "I had no idea you had another daughter." "Stepdaughter," Selina corrected quickly, her smile fixed. "My late husband's child from his first marriage. Mary has been unwell, rarely in society. Her constitution is quite delicate." Mary stood in the doorway, every instinct screaming at her to flee. 8 pairs of eyes studied her with varying degrees of curiosity, judgment, and surprise. Her hands shook so badly she had to clasp them together to hide the trembling. "How do you do?" she whispered, the words barely audible. David rose from his seat, his expression warm. "Miss Carroway, I'm delighted you could join us. Please." He gestured to her assigned place, though his eyes narrowed slightly when he noted how far from him she'd been positioned. Mary took her seat, trying to make herself as small as possible. Mrs. Hastings beside her studied her with the sharp gaze of a hawk spotting prey. "My dear," the woman said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Lady Selina tells us you've been quite unwell. How brave of you to attempt dinner. Are you certain you're strong enough?" Yes, thank you." Mary's voice was barely above a whisper. "One must admire her determination," Colonel Pembroke added from her other side. "Though perhaps it would be wiser to rest. We wouldn't want you to overtax yourself." The message was clear. You don't belong here. As the first course was served, Selina began her campaign in earnest. "Mary has always been rather fragile," she said to the table at large, her tone suggesting maternal concern rather than criticism. "Not like our dear Isla, who has such vigor and accomplishment. Isla, tell His Grace about your watercolors, the ones that were so admired at Mrs. Whitmore's gathering." Isla, positioned perfectly at David's right, began to describe her paintings with practiced ease. She was indeed accomplished, her technique was competent, her subject choices conventional, her descriptions polished, everything a young lady of good breeding should be. "And Mary, Mrs." Hastings asked, turning to her prey, "do you also paint?" Before Mary could answer, Selina laughed a light, dismissive sound. "Oh, Mary has no artistic ability, I'm afraid. She appreciates beauty, of course, in her simple way, but creation requires a certain refinement of sensibility that not everyone possesses." Mary felt the words like physical blows. She stared at her untouched soup, willing herself to disappear, to be nothing, to fulfill every expectation of inadequacy. "Perhaps she has other accomplishments," Mr. Pembroke suggested. "Music? Needlework?" Mary's education was unfortunately disrupted by her various illnesses, Selina said smoothly. "We've focused primarily on her health rather than accomplishments. One must have priorities, after all." The subtext was unmistakable. Mary had nothing to offer. Mary was nothing. David had been watching this performance with growing fury, carefully masked behind polite interest. He recognized the strategy, death by 1,000 cuts, each remark seemingly concerned, actually cruel. He saw how Mary shrank with each comment, how her hands trembled, how she seemed to fold in on herself. This was systematic destruction disguised as care. He waited until Isla finished describing her watercolors, then turned his attention deliberately away from her. "Miss Carroway," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the table, "I was fascinated by our conversation in the garden this afternoon." Mary's head jerked up, surprise evident in her face. "You spoke about light and shadow in a way I'd never considered before," David continued. about shadows containing color rather than simply being absence of light. I've been thinking about it all afternoon. Tell me, is that observation based on any particular artist's theory, or is it your own insight? The table fell silent. All eyes turned to Mary, who looked like a rabbit caught in a trap. I don't. Her voice failed. Please, David said gently, his eyes holding hers with encouragement. I'm genuinely interested in your perspective. Mary swallowed hard. Years of conditioning screamed at her to stay silent, to not draw attention, to be nothing. But something in David's expression, genuine interest, not pity, made her voice emerge in a halting whisper. It comes from observation, Your Grace. When you look at shadows carefully, especially outdoors, you can see they're not actually black or grey. They're filled with reflected light from the sky, from surrounding objects, blues and purples and sometimes greens. Turner captures it well in his work, but many earlier painters missed it entirely. Turner? Mr. Hastings leaned forward with interest. You're familiar with his work? Yes, sir. My father had books about contemporary painters. Turner's use of light is remarkable, unconventional, but remarkable. David asked another question, this time about specific techniques. Mary answered, still hesitant, still expecting to be silenced. But instead, David listened with complete attention, asked follow-up questions, drew her out with careful encouragement, and slowly, like a flower opening to sun after long darkness, Mary began to speak more freely. She described the difference between English and Italian landscape traditions. She discussed the symbolism in pre-Raphaelite work. She analyzed composition with insight that revealed deep study and natural understanding. Her voice grew stronger, her eyes brighter, and her hands stopped trembling as she forgot to be afraid. The other guests, initially following Selina's lead in dismissing Mary, found themselves genuinely intrigued. Mrs. Pembroke asked about portraiture. Colonel Pembroke wanted to know about military paintings he'd seen. Even Mrs. Hastings looked interested rather than contemptuous. Mary was transformed. This was the woman David had glimpsed in the garden, intelligent, passionate, fully alive. Selina's face grew tighter with each question Mary answered. Finally, she interrupted with sharp authority. Mary, you're monopolizing His Grace's attention. How selfish. I'm sure the Duke is simply being polite. You shouldn't burden him with your opinions. Mary stopped mid-sentence, color flooding then draining from her face. The spell broke. She was nothing again. She had overstepped. She had embarrassed everyone. Perhaps you should return to your chambers, Selina continued, her voice edged with steel beneath concern. You look feverish, dear. These exertions are too much for your delicate constitution. Mary pushed back from the table, shame overwhelming her. Forgive me. Lady Selina. David's voice cut across the room with unmistakable authority. Miss Carroway is not monopolizing my attention. She has captured it entirely. And I assure you, she is burdening no one. The table froze. I have attended countless dinners, David continued, his eyes hard as they fixed on Selina, and rarely have I encountered such depth of artistic understanding. Miss Carroway's insights are remarkable, genuinely remarkable. He turned to Mary, his expression softening. Please, don't leave. I would consider it a personal favor if you continued. Mary stood trapped between flight and obedience, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Every guest watched this unprecedented confrontation, a duke publicly contradicting his hostess, defending the supposedly inconsequential stepdaughter. Your Grace is too kind, Selina managed, though her smile had become rictus. But surely, tell me, Miss Carroway, Mr. Pembroke interrupted, have you done any painting yourself? With such knowledge, you must have tried your hand at it. Before Mary could answer, Selina spoke quickly. Mary has no artistic ability. She merely admires from a distance. Don't you, dear? That's curious, David said, his tone conversational but his eyes sharp. Lady Selina, I discovered quite remarkable paintings in the garden shed. Landscapes, portraits, studies of remarkable skill. Whose work is that? Selina's face went white. The trap was sprung, and she knew it. If she claimed the paintings, it would be an obvious lie. If she admitted Mary created them, it exposed years of denial. Those are old pieces, she said finally. Nothing of consequence. I'd forgotten they were there. Old pieces? David's eyebrow raised. Some appeared quite recent. The paint was barely dry. But if they're nothing of consequence, you won't mind if I purchase them? I'd like to add them to my collection. The work is exceptional, easily worth a considerable sum. "Aye," Selina floundered. "Those paintings are Mary's, Your Grace." The voice was quiet but clear. Everyone turned to stare at Eyre, who sat very still, her hands clenched in her lap, her face pale but determined. "Isla," Selina began, warning in her voice. "She's quite talented," Eyre continued, not looking at her mother. "She always has been. Father was so proud of her work. He wanted her to study properly, to develop her gift." "Isla, you're confused." "I'm not confused, Mother." Eyre finally met her mother's eyes. "I've been watching you lie all evening, watching you hurt Mary the way you always have, and I can't be part of it anymore." The room erupted in murmurs. Selina's carefully constructed narrative was collapsing before the eyes of society's witnesses. The guests exchanged glances loaded with meaning. They understood now what had been happening, what they were witnessing. Mary stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. David defending her, Eyre supporting her, the truth exposed. It was too much, too overwhelming, too contrary to everything she'd been taught to believe about herself. Her breath came faster, shallower. The room spun. Years of conditioning screamed that accepting praise was wrong, dangerous, that she was nothing, and this attention would only lead to worse punishment. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She ran. David found her on the terrace, gasping for air like a drowning woman. She was bent over, hands on her knees, trembling violently. He approached slowly, carefully, as he might approach a wounded animal. "Mary." She flinched at his voice but didn't run further. There was nowhere to go. "Can you breathe?" he asked gently. "Look at me. Breathe with me. In and out." Slowly, following his steady rhythm, Mary's breathing calmed. But when she finally straightened and looked at him, her eyes were wild with confusion and pain. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Why are you saying these things? Why are you lying?" "Lying?" David's voice was gentle but firm. "Mary, I haven't lied once tonight. You said I was remarkable, that my insights were valuable, that my paintings were exceptional. But I'm not. I'm nothing. Everyone knows that. Lady Selina knows it. She's told me for years. She must be right. She must be." "Mary," David took a careful step closer. "Why do you believe you are nothing?" "Because I am." The words came out desperate, pleading, as if she needed him to understand. "Because everyone says so. Because I must be. Because if I'm not nothing, then all these years of—" Her voice broke. "It hurts less to believe I'm nothing. Do you understand? It hurts less." David felt fury and heartbreak war in his chest. "Everyone is wrong," he said quietly but with absolute conviction, "and I intend to prove it." They returned to the dining room eventually, though Mary felt as if she were floating outside her own body. The guests stared with varying expressions of sympathy, curiosity, and embarrassment. Selina sat rigid, her face a mask of barely controlled rage. Isla watched with tears in her eyes. David helped Mary to her seat, his hand briefly touching her shoulder in support, before returning to his place at the head of the table. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded diplomatic negotiations across Europe, "I find that I must extend my stay at Hartley House indefinitely. Business matters require my continued presence in the area." Selina's teacup rattled against its saucer. "And," David continued, his eyes finding Mary's across the table, "I hope to continue my acquaintance with Miss Carraway. Her company is enlightening. In fact, I believe she may be the most genuinely interesting person I've encountered in years." The declaration hung in the air, unmistakable in its meaning. The Duke of Wellington, England's most eligible bachelor, had publicly expressed interest in the inconsequential stepdaughter. Selina's smile could have curdled milk, but she couldn't object without revealing the cruelty everyone now suspected. "Of course, Your Grace. We're honored by your continued presence. And naturally, Mary is available for conversation, as you wish." The words tasted like poison, but she had no choice. As the dinner finally, mercifully ended, three women found themselves in very different states of mind. Selina calculated revenge with cold precision. This duke had humiliated her, exposed her carefully constructed narrative, elevated Mary in ways that threatened everything. He wouldn't win. She would find a way to destroy this before it destroyed her plans for Eyre, for herself, for everything she'd worked toward. Isla sat in her chamber, staring at her reflection and questioning every truth she'd been taught. If her mother had lied about Mary being worthless, what else had been lies? The casual cruelties she'd witnessed and ignored, the systematic exclusion, the years of psychological abuse disguised as concern, she'd been part of it all. And tonight, she'd finally chosen differently. And Mary stood at her window, watching stars appear in the darkening sky, caught between terror and desperate, fragile hope. The Duke saw something in her. He claimed she was remarkable. Eyre had defended her. Everything she'd believed about herself for 3 years was being challenged, and she didn't know if that was salvation or simply a more cruel form of destruction. Because if they were right, if she truly had worth, then she'd wasted years believing lies, had let herself be erased without fighting back, had accepted cruelty as deserved. But if they were wrong, if Selina's assessment was correct, then this brief glimpse of being seen would make her return to nothing unbearable. Mary touched the window pane, her paint-stained fingers leaving marks on the glass. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Selina's rage would be terrible. The price for tonight's defiance would be high. But for this one evening, someone had called her remarkable. Someone had chosen her. And Mary didn't know if that was the beginning of everything or the end, only that she was standing on a precipice, and the next step would either be flight or falling. She only knew that the Duke's words echoed in her mind with dangerous persistence. Everyone is wrong, and I intend to prove it. What terrified her most was that a small, stubborn part of her, the part that had hidden paintings under floorboards, that had stolen moments in the garden, that had refused to be entirely extinguished, wanted desperately to believe him. Chapter 5. The Unraveling. The morning after the dinner party dawned grey and cold, matching the storm that had been building in Selina's chest throughout the sleepless night. She waited until the house was quiet, until the servants were occupied with breakfast preparations, until there were no witnesses. Then she descended on Mary's chamber like a fury from Greek mythology. Mary was still in her nightdress, having barely slept, when her door crashed open. She had time only to turn before Selina's hand connected with her face, a sharp, vicious slap that sent her stumbling backward. "You scheming little whore," Selina hissed, closing the door behind her with ominous quiet. "How dare you? How dare you?" "I didn't," Mary began, her hand to her burning cheek. Another slap, harder this time. Mary tasted blood. "Don't lie to me." Selina's voice shook with rage barely contained. "You deliberately seduced his attention. You knew I wanted him for Isla, and you schemed to steal him away. 3 years of you being properly invisible, and the moment a duke arrives, you suddenly develop opinions? Knowledge? You planned this." "No, I swear. I never." "You think I don't see what you're doing?" Selina grabbed Mary's arm, her nails digging in hard enough to bruise. "Playing the wounded bird, the hidden genius, the wronged innocent, making me look like a monster in front of society. Well, it won't work. Do you hear me? It won't work." She shoved Mary toward the small desk where the hidden paint supplies lay barely concealed. With violent efficiency, Selina swept them onto the floor, the tiny watercolor set, the precious brushes, the scraps of paper Mary had carefully hoarded. "No more painting," Selina said, crushing the watercolor cakes under her heel. "No more schemes. No more attempts to be something you're not." She ground the colors into the floorboards, blues and reds and yellows, mixing into muddy brown destruction. Mary watched, tears streaming silently down her face as the last tools of her small rebellion were destroyed. "You are nothing, Mary. Do you understand?" "Nothing. Last night was a fluke, a moment of the Duke's misplaced pity. He'll realize his error soon enough, and until he does, you will remain in this chamber. You will see no one. You will be the invisible ghost you should have stayed." Selina moved closer, her face inches from Mary's, her voice dropping to something more terrifying than shouting. "If you ever try to draw his attention again, I will make you wish your father had never remarried. I will make these years seem kind by comparison. Do you understand me?" "Yes, stepmother," Mary whispered, tasting blood and tears. "Good." Selina straightened, smoothing her dress, her face transforming back into its usual composed mask. "Now, clean up this mess. You'll receive bread and water, nothing more, until I decide you've learned your lesson." After she left, Mary sank to her knees amid the crushed paint and broken dreams, and believed every word. Of course Selina was right. Of course last night had been temporary madness. Of course the Duke's interest would fade once he realized what she truly was. Nothing. She gathered the broken pieces with shaking hands and felt the last ember of hope that the dinner party had kindled extinguish completely. Eyre had not slept. She'd lain awake replaying every moment of the evening, every word her mother had spoken, every lie she'd watched unfold. As dawn broke, she made a decision. Her mother's study was forbidden territory, always locked, but Eyre knew where the key was hidden. She waited until she heard Selina leave Mary's chamber, heard her mother's footsteps descend to the breakfast room, then slipped inside. The desk drawers were meticulously organized. Eyre searched quickly, heart pounding, knowing discovery would mean her mother's wrath. In the bottom drawer, hidden beneath estate documents, she found a small wooden box. Inside were letters. Mary's father's handwriting, unmistakable. Eyre's hands shook as she read. "My dearest Mary has her mother's gift," one letter read. "I have arranged for her to study with Mr. Hartwell, the portrait artist, beginning next autumn. The funds are designated specifically for her artistic education. This must not be changed, no matter what." Another letter, written shortly before his death. "I fear for Mary, should anything happen to me. Selina has never warmed to her, and I worry that without my protection, Mary's gentle spirit will be crushed. Gregory, you must watch over her, ensure she pursues her art. It is not merely a hobby, but her very soul made visible." There was more. Documents about trust funds specifically designated for Mary's education, instructions that had clearly been ignored. A journal in her father's hand describing Mary's paintings with such pride and love that Eyre felt sick. All of it hidden, all of it denied, all of it lies. Eyre pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting nausea. She had stood by for 3 years, had watched her mother destroy Mary piece by piece, had believed the lies about Mary's incompetence, her worthlessness, her burden on the family, and all of it, every word, had been calculated cruelty. In the Duke's guest chambers, Gregory had requested a private audience. David had agreed immediately, sensing the butler had information too sensitive for servants' hearing. "Your Grace," Gregory began, pulling documents from inside his coat. "I've served this household for 20 years. I made a promise to Mr. Carraway on his deathbed, and I've failed that promise for 3 years. I won't fail any longer." He spread papers across the table, letters, journal entries, legal documents. David read with growing fury, his jaw tightening with each revelation. "Mary sees the world as it should be, not as it is," Mr. Carraway had written. "I pray she never loses this vision, that the cruelty of this world never convinces her she is anything less than extraordinary." But that was exactly what had happened. Systematic, deliberate psychological destruction, years of abuse disguised as concern. A gift buried, a spirit crushed, a young woman convinced of her own worthlessness through relentless cruelty. "Why didn't you act before now?" David asked, his voice hard. Gregory's face showed his shame. "I had no power, Your Grace, no authority. Lady Selina controls everything in this house. The other servants know the truth, but we're helpless. Jobs are scarce, references are everything. We whisper our sympathies to Miss Mary, but we cannot protect her." He met David's eyes. "But you can." "Yes," David said quietly, fury crystallizing into determination. "I can." This was no longer merely attraction to an interesting woman. This was a moral imperative. He would not allow this abuse to continue one day longer. While David and Gregory conferred, Selina was implementing her own counter-strategy. The Duke's interest was genuine, his protection of Mary more than passing curiosity. He was a threat to everything. She needed Mary gone, permanently. Dr. Thornbury arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, summoned by urgent message. He was a man in his 50s, competent enough but plagued by gambling debts. Debts that Selina knew about. Debts that gave her leverage. "Miss Carraway has suffered a severe decline," Selina explained in her private sitting room. "Delusions, violent outbursts, complete disconnection from reality. I fear for her safety and the safety of others." "I see," Dr. Thornbury said carefully. "And you wish me to examine her?" "I wish you to certify that she requires immediate institutionalization, for her own protection, naturally. There's an excellent facility in Northumberland, very discreet, very secure. She'll receive the best care. Lady Selina, I cannot simply—" "Doctor," Selina's voice hardened, "I believe Lord Hastings would be most interested to know about your gambling debts and your unfortunate losses at cards last month, the ones you failed to pay." The threat hung in the air. Dr. Thornbury swallowed hard. When would you like me to examine her? This afternoon. The Duke is distracted with estate business. By evening, Mary will be en route to Northumberland, and this unfortunate episode will be resolved. Mary had spent the morning in a fog of despair. The broken paints on the floor seemed to mock her. Every positive thought from the previous evening had been crushed beneath Selina's fury and the weight of renewed conviction in her own worthlessness. By noon, she'd made her decision. She couldn't keep causing trouble, couldn't keep disrupting the household. Better to disappear entirely than to continue being a burden. She found paper plain, unpainted, and wrote carefully, "Dear Gregory, I have imposed on your kindness long enough. I am requesting placement as a governess in a distant household, anywhere that requires my services. I apologize for being such a burden these many years. Please convey my apologies to His Grace for any impropriety I displayed. I understand now that I overstepped terribly. Please don't think ill of me for leaving. It's better this way. With gratitude for your patience, Mary." She folded the letter, placed it on her desk, and sat down to wait for whatever came next. Freedom through disappearance, peace through erasure. It was what she deserved. Midnight found Gregory making his final rounds when he noticed light beneath the kitchen door. Inside, he found Mary sitting at the table, her letter of departure before her, tears streaming silently down her face. "Miss Mary," he said gently, "what's this?" "I'm leaving, Gregory. It's for the best. I only caused trouble. Lady Selina is right. I should never have presumed to be anything more than nothing." "Stop!" Gregory's voice was sharp. He crossed to her, pulling a leather-bound journal from his coat. "I have something you must see. Should have shown you years ago." He opened to a marked page, placed it before her. "Read. Your father's words." Through blurred tears, Mary read, "My daughter has a gift that terrifies me with its beauty. She sees the world as it should be, not as it is. I pray she never loses this vision, that the cruelty of this world never convinces her she is anything less than extraordinary." A sound escaped her, something between a sob and a gasp. "Father wrote that? 3 months before he died. He knew your gift, Mary. He cherished it. He made provisions for you to study, to grow, to become the artist you were meant to be." Gregory's voice softened. "Lady Selina destroyed those provisions, but she cannot destroy the truth. You are not nothing. You never were." Mary clutched the journal, reading the passage again and again. Grief overwhelming her. Grief for her father, for the lost years, for the person she might have been if cruelty hadn't convinced her she was worthless. "I miss him," she whispered. "I miss believing I could be something." "You can still believe it." The new voice made Mary's head snap up. Isla stood in the kitchen doorway, her own eyes red from crying, arms full of papers. "I found these in Mother's study," Isla said, approaching slowly. "Letters from Father, documents about your education, everything she hid from you, from us." She spread them on the table, proof of everything Selina had destroyed, evidence of every lie. "I'm so sorry, Mary," Isla's voice broke. "I stood by. I watched her hurt you. I believed her lies about you being worthless when all along." She couldn't finish. Mary stared at the documents, at the sister who had always been the preferred one, unable to process this shift in reality. "Why now?" Mary asked. "Why do you suddenly care?" "Because I watched the Duke see you last night. Really see you. And I realized if a stranger could see your worth in one conversation, what does that say about me? About all of us who've known you for years and believed Mother's lies?" Isla wiped her eyes. "I won't be part of it anymore. I won't let her do this to you." Morning brought David's arrival earlier than expected. He'd spent the night reading Mr. Carraway's journal, rage building with each page, determination hardening into steel. "I wish to see Miss Carraway," he informed the butler, who answered, not Gregory, who was with Mary. "I'm afraid Miss Carraway is unwell, Your Grace," Lady Selina says. "I will see her now, or I will know precisely why not." David's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to commanding armies and negotiating treaties. "Fetch Lady Selina immediately." Selina appeared, her smile strained. "Your Grace, Mary has had a severe episode. Dr. Thornbury is examining her now. I'm afraid she's quite unstable." "I will see her," David repeated, his eyes hard. Now, he found Mary in her chamber, hollow-eyed and pale, bruises visible on her arms and a cut on her lip. Dr. Thornbury stood nearby with his medical bag, looking uncomfortable. "What happened to her?" David demanded. "She fell," Selina said quickly. In her confusion, she fell repeatedly? With such precision? David's voice was ice. He turned to the doctor. Your diagnosis? Severe melancholia, Dr. Thornbury said, avoiding Mary's eyes. Nervous disorder. She requires immediate institutionalization for her own safety. Based on what examination? I observed her condition. You observed bruises that appear to be from physical assault, David said flatly. How convenient for Lady Selina that your diagnosis requires Mary's immediate removal from the household. Your Grace, I assure you. I have my own physician, Dr. Hartley, expert in nervous disorders. I'll have him provide a second opinion. Selina's face went white. That's unnecessary. I insist. David's smile was cold. Unless you'd prefer I investigate how Dr. Thornbury's gambling debts to Lord Hastings were mysteriously paid last month, just after another of his convenient diagnoses. The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. What followed was a standoff. Selina claimed guardian rights, maternal concern, protection of Mary's well-being. David wielded social pressure, threat of investigation, the power of his title. Mary sat voiceless between them, defaulting to the belief that she was indeed nothing, that all this conflict was her fault, that she should simply disappear and end everyone's trouble. Neither could act decisively without social consequences. Selina couldn't forcibly remove Mary against a duke's opposition without scandal. David couldn't remove Mary from her legal guardian without cause that could be proven in society's court of opinion. The impasse might have continued indefinitely if Mary hadn't finally broken completely. Gregory had hidden a few paintings she'd done months ago, kept them safe from Selina's destruction. They were in the garden shed, wrapped carefully. He'd planned to show them to David as proof of her talent. Mary found them first. She stood in the shed, surrounded by evidence of the person she'd almost been, and something inside her shattered. If she was nothing, these couldn't exist. If Selina was right, these had to be destroyed. Everything had to end. She began tearing the canvases, ripping through landscapes that had taken weeks to complete, destroying portraits painted with love and hope, erasing every trace of the self she'd dared to believe in. No. Eyre had followed her, grabbed her arms. Mary, stop. But Mary fought with desperate strength, trying to finish the destruction. They struggled, canvas tearing, paint smearing, until Gregory burst in with David close behind. I am nothing. Mary was sobbing, still fighting. I am nothing. She's right. Let me go. Let me disappear. David crossed the shed in 3 strides and pulled her away from the paintings, wrapping his arms around her to still her flailing hands. Stop. Mary, stop. But she couldn't stop. Years of abuse, of conditioning, of believing lies came pouring out in broken words and desperate sobs. You are not nothing, David said, holding her as she collapsed against him. You are not, and I will prove it to you, even if I must prove it every day for the rest of your life. Mary's knees gave out. David caught her as consciousness fled, exhaustion, starvation, psychological break, all combining into merciful darkness. When Mary woke hours later, she was in an unfamiliar room, clean, simple, sunlight streaming through lace curtains. For a confused moment, she thought she'd died. You're at the vicarage, a gentle voice said. A woman in her 50s sat beside the bed, knitting. I'm Mrs. Whitmore, the vicar's sister. You're quite safe here, dear. How did I? The Duke brought you, and your butler, Gregory, and your sister insisted on coming as well. Mrs. Whitmore smiled. Quite the procession, actually. His Grace was very firm that you were not to return to Hartley House. Mary tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Everything hurt. Rest, dear. You've been through quite an ordeal. But you're safe now. His Grace has made certain of it. Through the window, Mary could see a figure standing in the garden. Even from here, she recognized David's tall frame, the set of his shoulders. He had removed her from Hartley House, had taken her from Selina's reach, had insisted she was not nothing. Mary didn't know if this was salvation or simply a more complicated form of destruction. Didn't know if she could believe in her own worth after years of being taught she had none. But lying in this sunlit room, safe for the first time in 3 years, she felt something dangerous stir in her chest. Not hope, not yet, but perhaps possibility. The faintest whisper that maybe, just maybe, everyone who said she was nothing had been wrong. And David Howard, Duke of Wellington, standing guard in the garden below, was determined to prove it. Chapter 6. Healing and Truth. 3 days at the vicarage had passed like a dream, or perhaps like slowly waking from a nightmare. Mary's body was healing. The bruises had faded from purple to yellow-green, the cut on her lip had closed, and Mrs. Whitmore's patient feeding had begun to restore some color to her hollow cheeks. But her mind remained fractured, unable to trust the kindness surrounding her, waiting for the inevitable moment when it would be withdrawn. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore was a widow of 50-some years, with gentle hands and an unshakable calm that reminded Mary achingly of her own mother. She never demanded conversation, never pushed for gratitude, simply provided care as naturally as breathing. Gregory visited twice daily, bringing small comforts and quiet reassurance. Eyre had moved into the vicarage entirely, sharing Mary's room, reading aloud when Mary couldn't bear her own thoughts, and David came every afternoon, staying precisely 1 hour, as propriety demanded. Mary sat in the small sitting room, hands folded in her lap, watching Mrs. Whitmore arrange fresh flowers with the focused intensity of someone expecting disaster. Every kindness felt like debt accumulating. Every gentle word felt like a trap she didn't understand. "You don't have to sit so still, dear," Mrs. Whitmore said without looking up. "This is your home now, for as long as you need it. You're allowed to be comfortable." "I don't want to be trouble," Mary whispered automatically. "You're not trouble. You're recovering." Mrs. Whitmore finally looked at her, eyes kind but firm. "There's a difference, though I suspect you've been taught not to see it." Mary's hands twisted in her lap. "I should help. I could clean, or mend, or you could rest, you could heal, you could trust that we don't require payment for human decency." Mrs. Whitmore's voice softened. "Though I understand that's difficult when decency has been withheld so long." When David arrived that afternoon, he brought a wrapped package and the same patient expression he'd worn for 3 days. Mary had barely spoken to him since the garden shed, shame overwhelming her every time she remembered her breakdown in his arms. "Good afternoon, Mary," he said, taking the seat across from her that had become his customary place. "I brought you something." He unwrapped a canvas carefully, turning it to face her. Mary's breath caught. It was one of her paintings, a landscape of Hartley House's walled garden, done perhaps a year ago, one she'd thought destroyed or lost. "Where did you get that?" Her voice was barely audible. "I purchased it from a dealer in London," David said quietly. "Your stepmother sold several of your works anonymously. This one was bought by a widower who wrote to the dealer afterward," he said. David pulled a letter from his pocket. He said, "This painting made me weep for the first time since my wife's death. Whoever painted this understands loss and hope in equal measure. It reminded me that beauty still exists in a world that feels empty." "You did that, Mary. Your art touched a stranger's grief and offered comfort." Mary stared at the painting, at her own brushstrokes, at the evidence that something she'd created had mattered to someone. "He's mistaken," she whispered. "It's not that good. He's being kind. He's being honest. As am I." David set the canvas where Mary could see it. "Your art has power. You have power. That's truth, not kindness." After he left, Mary sat staring at the painting until darkness fell, unable to reconcile the worthless creature Selina had described with someone whose work could move a stranger to tears. Eyre had transformed in the days since leaving Hartley House. Gone was the practiced perfection, the careful performance. She braided Mary's hair with gentle hands, read their father's favorite poetry aloud, and one afternoon, while Mary sat silent and unreachable, made a confession. "I was jealous of you," Eyre said quietly. "For years. Mother praised my watercolors, my accomplishments, but I always knew that I was copying something, that my artistic talent was just trying to recreate what you did naturally." She set down the book she'd been reading. "Every compliment Mother gave me felt hollow, because I knew whose style I was imitating, whose gift I was mimicking badly." Mary turned to look at her, confusion evident. "You were jealous of me. You had something real, Mary, something authentic. I had only performance." Eyre's eyes filled with tears. "I told myself Mother was right, that you were worthless, because it was easier than admitting I was chasing shadows of your talent while you were locked away for having the genuine article." It was the first time anyone had suggested Mary possessed something worth envying. The idea was so foreign Mary couldn't process it. "I'm sorry," Eyre whispered, "for every lie I believed, for every time I stayed silent, for being too cowardly to question until a stranger saw what I should have seen years ago." Mary reached out hesitantly, touched Isla's hand. You questioned eventually. That matters. It was the first time Mary had offered comfort instead of requiring it, something small but significant. Gregory came the fourth afternoon with a leather satchel Mary recognized from her father's study. His stern face looked older, wearier, as he sat beside her. I need to tell you something, Miss Mary. Something I should have told you years ago. He opened the satchel, revealing stacks of documents. Your father appointed me your godfather. Did you know that? Mary shook her head, stunned. He made me promise to protect you, to ensure his wishes for your education were honored. I failed that promise. Gregory's hands trembled as he spread papers across the table. I kept these, his letters, his journal, documents about the trust fund designated for your artistic training. I preserved them in secret, telling myself I was waiting for the right moment to act. But the truth is I was a coward. Afraid of losing my position, afraid of Lady Selina's power, I let you suffer for 3 years rather than risk my own security. Gregory, Mary began. No, let me finish. His voice was rough with emotion. Your father trusted me to look after you, and I hid papers in a drawer while you were destroyed piece by piece. I'm sorry, Miss Mary. Sorrier than I can express. Mary looked at this man who had shown her small kindnesses, who had preserved her father's words when everything else was being erased. You did what you could, she said quietly, surprised by her own conviction. You saved what mattered. The rest wasn't yours to prevent. It was the first time she'd defended someone else rather than attacking herself. Gregory heard it too, and something like hope crossed his weathered face. While Mary healed in the vicarage's protection, Selina waged war in London's drawing rooms. The narrative she spread was masterful. Poor Mary, so mentally unstable, using illness to manipulate the Duke's sympathies, seducing his attention through calculated helplessness. The Duke, being deceived by a clever performance of victimhood. Society whispered, some believed, others questioned. But the campaign had its effect. David began receiving concerned letters from friends, warnings from family, suggestions that his reputation was being damaged by association with questionable circumstances. He burned every letter unread after the first 3. 5 days after arriving at the vicarage, Mary attempted to paint. Mrs. Whitmore had set up a small easel in the garden, positioned where afternoon light fell warmly. David had provided supplies, good quality paper, proper paints, brushes that didn't shed bristles, everything Mary needed except the belief she deserved to use them. She sat before the blank page for an hour, brush trembling in her hand. Every time she tried to make a mark, Selina's voice echoed, You have no talent. You're wasting resources. You're worthless. It doesn't have to be perfect. David's voice came from behind her. She hadn't heard him arrive. It doesn't have to be anything except honest. I can't, Mary whispered. Every time I try, I hear her voice telling me I'm worthless. Then make one stroke that defies that voice. Just one. Mary's hand shook violently, but she touched brush to paper. A single curved line, the beginning of a rose petal. Simple, imperfect, but there. She stared at it, waiting for disgust, for shame, for the crushing weight of worthlessness. Instead, she felt possibility. David moved to where he could see the paper. It's beautiful, he said quietly, and for one fragile moment, Mary believed it might be. That evening, David asked the question that had been building for days. They sat in the garden as twilight fell, Mary having completed her single rose with painstaking care. Mary, what would you do if you believed you were extraordinary? She looked at him, baffled. I don't understand the question. If you believed, truly believed, that you had worth, talent, value, what would you do? How would you live? I can't imagine that, Mary said honestly. I don't know how to think that way. Humor me, just for a moment. Pretend it's true. What would you do? Mary closed her eyes, trying to envision a world where she wasn't nothing. I would paint, she finally whispered. I would create. I would live. Actually live, not just survive. I would walk in gardens without hiding. I would speak without apologizing for taking up space. I would. Her voice broke. I don't know. I can't imagine it. David leaned forward, his expression intense. Then, paint, create, live, start acting as if it's true, and perhaps the belief will follow. You don't have to believe you're extraordinary yet, Mary. You only have to act as if you might be, and see what happens. Later that evening, Isla sought David in the vicar's small study, where he was reviewing correspondence. She closed the door carefully behind her. "Your Grace, there's something you should understand about my mother." Isla's face was pale but determined. Her cruelty wasn't random, it was personal. She explained what she'd pieced together from letters and memories, how Selina had genuinely loved Mary's father, how he had married her but never stopped mourning his first wife, how Mary's very existence with her mother's face and artistic gift was a daily reminder that Selina was second choice. The psychological destruction was revenge, Isla said quietly. Punishment for being loved when Mother wasn't. Every time Mary created something beautiful, it reminded Mother of the woman Father actually wanted. So, she had to destroy it, had to destroy Mary. David felt fury rise again, colder and more terrible for understanding its roots. This wasn't mere cruelty, it was calculated vengeance against a child for the crime of being loved. "Thank you for telling me," he said grimly. "It explains much." "I don't tell you for her sake," Isla said. "I tell you so you understand what Mary survived, the intentionality of it, the years of deliberate destruction. She's not weak for being broken, Your Grace. She's miraculous for being broken, but still here." On the 6th day, Gregory brought Mary the final letter her father had written, meant to be delivered on her 20th birthday, still weeks away. He'd kept it safe, waiting for the right moment. Mary's hands shook as she broke the seal, as she saw her father's familiar hand one last time. "My dearest Mary, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and I pray that you've been allowed to grow into the extraordinary woman I know you can become. Your gift terrifies me with its beauty, the way you see the world as it should be rather than as it is. That vision is precious and rare. I have made provisions for your artistic education. This is not negotiable. No matter what anyone tells you, and I fear they may tell you many things, you must pursue your art. It is not vanity or foolishness. It is your soul made visible, and the world needs what you can create. I regret marrying Selina. I thought you needed a mother, and I believed she could love you as I do. I was wrong. If she has made your life difficult, know that it stems from her own pain, not from any failing in you. You are not responsible for others' inability to see your worth. Paint, my darling girl. Create. Live fully. You are extraordinary, and I believe that absolutely. With all my love, Father." Mary sobbed as she read, grief overwhelming her for the father who had seen her truly, for the years stolen, for the person she might have been if cruelty hadn't intervened. But beneath the grief, something else stirred. Her father had believed in her, had known her worth, had wanted her to create. Maybe, just maybe, he'd been right and Selina wrong. David found Mary in the garden the next afternoon, actually painting, not hiding, not apologizing, but working on a proper canvas with focused intensity. "Mary," he said quietly, not wanting to startle her, "I must tell you something, and I need you to truly hear it." She set down her brush, anxiety immediate. "Have I done something wrong?" "No. Listen." He moved closer. "I'm falling in love with you, not with who you might become, but with who you are now. The woman who sees beauty where others see weeds. The woman who survived years of cruelty without becoming cruel herself. The woman who creates light, even from within darkness." Mary's face went white. "You can't. I'm nothing. Then prove it," David interrupted firmly. "Show me you're nothing, because everything I observe contradicts that claim. I don't know how to prove it. Paint what you see when you look at yourself. Total honesty, not what Selina told you, but what you actually see. Can you do that?" Mary stared at him, terrified. "What if I paint nothing? Then you'll have proven your point." "But I don't think you will." That night, alone with a fresh canvas, Mary picked up her brush with shaking hands. Selina's voice screamed that she was worthless. Her father's letter whispered that she was extraordinary. David's words insisted she was worthy of love. She made the first stroke, then another, tentative at first, then with growing conviction. What emerged over hours of painful honesty was not a monster, not nothing, but a young woman with haunted hazel eyes and paint-stained hands, broken but not destroyed, scarred but still breathing, nothing like beautiful, but somehow still, there. Mary stared at what she'd created and whispered into the darkness, "I am still here. Underneath everything, I am still here." For the first time in 3 years, she slept without nightmares, the self-portrait propped beside her bed, and Gregory standing silent guard outside her door. Chapter 7. The Public Declaration. 2 weeks at the vicarage had given Mary something she'd never expected. Time. Time to heal, to think, to begin the slow work of separating truth from the lies that had been carved into her soul. She was still fragile, still fought daily battles between the voice that said she was nothing and the growing whisper that perhaps she might be something. But she was fighting. That itself was new. When David's formal request arrived, a meeting with the Carraway family at Hartley House, Mary's first instinct was pure terror. "It's a trap," she said, hands trembling as Isla read the message aloud. "Lady Selina she'll do nothing," David said firmly. He'd been present when the message was delivered, had orchestrated its timing precisely. "This is a formal request from a duke. She cannot refuse without exposing herself to society's censure. And I've ensured society will be watching." "What do you mean?" "I've invited witnesses, prominent families, people whose opinions matter in London's drawing rooms." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "Lady Selina has waged her campaign in whispers. I'm bringing this into the light." Mary felt sick. "You want me to go back there, to that house, to face her?" "I want you to be seen," David corrected gently. "To be visible, to have witnesses to your worth. But only if you're ready. I won't force this." Mary. She wasn't ready, would never be ready. But she looked at Isla's hopeful face, at Gregory's quiet encouragement, at David's unwavering belief, and heard her father's words echo. "You are extraordinary." "I'll go," she whispered, "but I can't promise I won't run." "Then I'll be there to catch you," David replied simply. Selina received the news with barely contained glee. The Duke was finally making his formal announcement. Despite all obstacles, despite Mary's theatrical performances and attempts to seduce his attention, he was choosing properly, choosing Isla, restoring the natural order. She arranged everything with meticulous care. The drawing room was transformed: flowers, refreshments, seating arranged to showcase Isla to perfection. She invited the Pembrokes, the Hastings, the Cornwalls families whose approval mattered, whose witnessing of Isla's triumph would cement her daughter's place in society. "Wear the rose silk," she told Isla, who stood at her window staring toward the village where Mary stayed. "The one that brings out your complexion. Your hair should be arranged in the Grecian style. You must be absolutely perfect." "Mother," Isla said quietly, not turning, What if nothing? Today is your day, Isla. Everything I've worked for comes to fruition." Selina's smile was triumphant. Mary's little rebellion ends, and proper order is restored. She didn't notice Isla's expression, half pity, half dread, as her daughter finally turned to face her. The carriage ride to Hartley House was the longest of Mary's life. She wore a dress David had commissioned, simple but elegant, pale blue, that brought out her eyes, and Isla had arranged her auburn hair with gentle hands. She looked like a lady, not a servant, but inside, she felt like the worthless creature Selina had always said she was. "I can't breathe," she gasped as the house came into view. "I can't." "Yes, you can." Isla took her hand firmly. "You're not alone anymore, Mary. I'm with you. Gregory is with you. David is with you. And Father," her voice caught, "Father is with you too. You carry his belief in your heart. Your father would be so proud of your courage, Miss Mary," Gregory added from his seat opposite them. He'd insisted on accompanying them, on being present as her godfather. So very proud. The words steadied her enough to step from the carriage, though her legs shook and her hands were ice cold. David waited at the entrance, formal and commanding in his tailored coat. When he saw Mary, something softened in his expression. He offered his arm. "Ready?" "No," Mary whispered honestly. "Good. That means you're brave rather than foolish." His hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. "Remember, you're not nothing, and I'm about to prove it." The drawing room was crowded with society's elite, all watching with avid interest as David entered with Mary on his arm. The gasps were audible. Whispers rippled through the gathered guests. This was not the entrance anyone had expected. Selina stood near the fireplace, Isla beside her, both dressed impeccably. But where Selina's face showed shocked fury barely masked, Isla's expression held only quiet determination. "Lady Selina," David said formally, "thank you for receiving me and for gathering witnesses. I have an important announcement to make." The room fell silent, every eye fixed on the Duke. Selina's smile was rigid, her hands clenched at her sides. She'd positioned Isla perfectly, prominently, ready to receive his proposal. Mary, she'd assumed, would be relegated to the corner, invisible as always. But David kept Mary at his side as he moved to the center of the room. "Miss Carroway," he said, his voice carrying clearly to every corner. Every head turned to Mary, who stood frozen in terror. "I have a question for you, and I require an honest answer." The silence was absolute. Selina's face had gone white. The guests leaned forward, confused but fascinated. "Do you believe you are nothing?" The question fell like a stone into still water, ripples of shock spreading through the room. Mary's breath stopped. Her mind went blank. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to disappear. "Because I have spent these weeks observing you, studying your art, listening to your rare words," David continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "And I have concluded something quite different. I believe you are extraordinary. But what matters, Mary, is what you believe." The pressure was unbearable, every eye in the room boring into her. Selina's fury palpable, like heat from a fire. The voice in Mary's head screaming, "Say yes, say you're nothing, stop making trouble, be invisible." But another voice rose beneath it. Her father's words from his letter, David's steady belief, Isla's quiet support, Gregory's preserved documents, the paintings that had made strangers weep, the self-portrait she'd created broken but not destroyed, still here. "So I ask you now," David's voice intensified, "before all these witnesses, who are you, Mary Carroway?" The impossible question, the one she'd never been allowed to answer, the one that defined everything. Mary's lips moved, but no sound emerged. She tried again. "I am," the whisper was barely audible. "I am my father's daughter." "Say it again," David encouraged gently. Louder. Something broke open in Mary's chest. Years of silence, of erasure, of being told she was nothing, all of it shattering like glass. "I am not nothing." The words came stronger, louder, carrying across the stunned room. "I am Mary Carroway. I paint because it is my soul made visible. I feel because I am alive. I matter because I exist." She turned to face Selina, meeting her stepmother's shocked eyes without flinching for the first time in 3 years. "And you had no right to tell me otherwise." The room erupted in murmurs. Guests exchanged glances heavy with meaning, understanding dawning on faces that had believed Selina's lies about Mary's incompetence and instability. "The poor girl is having an episode," Selina tried, her voice shrill with desperation. "You see how unstable she is, Your Grace. This is exactly why I've protected society from—" "No, Mother." Isla's clear voice cut through. She stepped forward, away from her mother's side, moving to stand beside Mary. "The only episode is the years you spent lying about Mary's talent, about Father's wishes, about everything. Isla, you don't understand. I found the letters, Mother, Father's journal, the documents about Mary's education that you burned. Gregory kept copies." Isla's voice shook but held firm. "Everyone here should know the truth. Mary isn't unstable or incompetent. She's extraordinarily talented. And you've spent 3 years destroying her because she reminded you that Father never loved you the way he loved her mother." The gasps this time were shocked, scandalized. The revelation was too dramatic, too raw for polite society, but it rang with unmistakable truth. David turned to face the assembled guests, his expression grave. "I have witnessed systematic cruelty masked as concern. I have seen extraordinary talent deliberately suppressed. I have observed a young woman convinced of her worthlessness by the very person who should have nurtured her." He looked directly at Selina. "Lady Selina, your guardianship of Mary Carroway has been a perversion of duty. I am formally challenging it before these witnesses." The social consequence was immediate. The Duke of Wellington, whose word carried weight in every drawing room in England, had publicly condemned Selina Carroway. Reputation was everything in their world, and hers was crumbling before their eyes. "She has her mother's face." Selina's composure finally shattered, rage and jealousy spilling out unchecked. "Everything I did, everything I sacrificed, and she has that woman's face. She took everything from me. He never loved me, never saw me, because he was too busy mourning her." The confession hung in the air, ugly and true. The witnesses stared, horrified and fascinated. The motivation was exposed, not concern, but jealous revenge. Years of psychological abuse laid bare. Mary felt something shift inside her. Selina's cruelty wasn't about Mary's worthlessness. It had never been about that. It was about Selina's pain, Selina's jealousy, Selina's inability to accept being second choice. Not my fault, Mary thought with dawning wonder. Never my fault. David turned back to Mary, his expression softening. The room still watched, but his focus was entirely on her. Now I have a question that matters more than any other. He moved closer, close enough that Mary could see the vulnerability in his eyes beneath the ducal authority. Mary Caraway, I have been courted by the most celebrated beauties in England. I have had my choice of accomplished women with impeccable pedigrees. He paused, letting the words settle. And I choose you, not despite who you are, but because of who you are. Only you, Mary. It has only ever been you since the moment I saw you holding that canvas, believing you had to hide your light. Mary's heart hammered. This was too much, too public, too permanent. Every instinct screamed that she would ruin him, burden him, prove Selina right about her worthlessness. Will you trust what I see in you? David asked quietly. Will you believe me when I say you are everything? The question hung between them. The room held its breath. Mary looked at this man, who had seen her at her worst broken, sobbing, trying to destroy her own work, and had called her extraordinary, who had fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself, who stood before society now, offering not just protection, but love. I want to, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I'm so tired of believing I'm nothing. I want to believe you. I want to believe in myself. She took a shaky breath, feeling Isla's supportive presence beside her, Gregory's quiet strength behind her, her father's words echoing in her heart. Yes, Mary said, her voice growing stronger. Yes, David. I choose to believe. I choose you. I choose me. The kiss was gentle but public, sealing before witnesses not just their union but Mary's rebirth. When their lips met, Mary felt the last chains of worthlessness begin to break. This was her first act of absolute faith in her own worthiness to be loved. The room erupted in applause. Genuine, warm approval. The guests had witnessed something remarkable, not just a proposal, but a woman reclaiming her existence. Selina stood isolated, her fury impotent against the tide of social approval washing over Mary and David. Guests subtly moved away from her, conversations pointedly excluding her. Her hold on society, built through years of careful manipulation, crumbled in minutes. Eyre rushed forward to embrace Mary, both sisters crying. I'm so proud of you, Eyre whispered. So proud. Gregory appeared at Mary's other side, his stern face transformed by a smile. Your father, he said quietly, is rejoicing, Miss Mary. I know it absolutely. As the gathering dispersed, with guests already spreading the scandalous, romantic tale through London's social networks, David escorted Mary toward the door. She was leaving Hartley House, but this time on the Duke's arm, as his chosen bride, with society's approval ringing in her ears. At the threshold, she paused and looked back. Selina stood alone in the drawing room, her triumph turned to ashes, her schemes exposed. For a moment, Mary felt something almost like pity. Then she looked at Eyre, still standing uncertain in the wreckage of their mother's plans. Come with me? Mary asked softly. Eyre's face transformed with relief and joy. I thought you'd never ask. The two sisters walked out together, one who had been prisoner, one who had been performer, both finally free to be themselves. This isn't over, Selina's voice carried from behind them, sharp with desperate rage. I will fight this. I will. Please do, David replied calmly, not bothering to turn. I welcome the opportunity to expose you further. Every action you take will only demonstrate more clearly why Mary needed protection from your care. As Mary stepped into sunlight, walking away from her prison toward an unknown future, she felt something she barely recognized. Hope, not the fragile, desperate hope that breaks at the first hardship, but solid hope built on the foundation of people who saw her worth, of her own emerging belief, of choosing to trust that maybe, just maybe, she was extraordinary after all. Two sisters walked into freedom together, leaving destruction behind and possibility ahead. But as they rode away, Mary knew her journey wasn't complete. Believing she had worth and living as if she did were different battles. The easier one was over. The harder one, learning to inhabit her worth daily, to create without fear, to love without expecting abandonment, still lay ahead. But this time, she wouldn't face it alone. This time, she had chosen to believe. And that choice, terrifying and liberating in equal measure, was only the beginning. Chapter 8. Only You. 3 days had passed since Mary walked out of Hartley House, yet she still woke expecting punishment. The morning light streaming through the windows of Lady Catherine's London townhouse felt too bright, too generous. Mary sat at the breakfast table, hands trembling slightly as she buttered toast she would actually be allowed to eat. "You're doing it again," Isla observed, gently from across the table. Her sister had transformed in these few days, softer somehow, without their mother's expectations crushing her into performance. "Doing what?" "Apologizing with your posture." Isla reached across, touching Mary's hunched shoulder. "You're allowed to take up space here." Mary straightened, then immediately felt foolish for the effort. Healing, she was learning, was not a straight path. Some mornings she woke, believing David's words. Others, Selina's voice echoed so loudly she could barely breathe. The sound of footsteps in the hall made her pulse quicken. David appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, that gentle smile that still confused her lighting his face. "I've brought something," he said, then paused, reading her tension. "May I come in?" "Even now?" He asked permission. "Even now?" He gave her choice. "Of course." The words came easier each day, though her hands still twisted in her lap. He entered, setting a wrapped package on the table. "I thought you might want these back." Mary stared at the canvas-shaped bundle, heart hammering. "What is it?" "Open it and see." Her fingers fumbled with the twine. The wrapping fell away, revealing 3 paintings. Her paintings, the ones Selina had sold years ago. Landscapes she'd created in stolen moments before she'd learned to believe they were worthless. "How did you—" "Gregory kept records of everything Selina sold. I've been tracking them down." David's voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes held something fiercer. "They're yours, Mary. They were always yours." She touched the canvas, remembering the girl who had painted this. Had she really created something so full of light? The colors seemed impossibly vibrant, the brushstrokes confident in a way she no longer felt. "I can't accept—" "You're doing it again," Isla interrupted softly. "Pushing away what's yours." Mary looked between them. Her sister, her— What was David? Suitor seemed too small a word for what he offered. He was offering her back herself, piece by piece, and she kept trying to refuse the gift. "I don't know how to accept things," she admitted, voice barely above whisper. "Then learn." David pulled out a chair, sitting across from her. "We have time." But did they? Every day brought new whispers. Selina's campaign of rumors painted Mary as manipulative, unstable, a social climber who had somehow ensnared London's most eligible bachelor. Each cutting word found its mark, confirming the worthlessness she'd been taught to believe. "There's something else," David said, and Mary's stomach clenched. Here it was, the moment he would realize his mistake. "I've arranged an exhibition, your work, under your own name, at the Pemberton Gallery." The room tilted. "You can't be serious." "I'm entirely serious. Next week, your paintings will hang in one of London's most respected galleries." "No." Mary stood abruptly, chair scraping. "No, I can't. They'll see. They'll know. They'll know you're talented," Isla finished. "That's what terrifies you, isn't it? Not that they'll reject you, but that they might not." Mary pressed her hands to her face. Her sister was right. Worthlessness was familiar, safe in its predictability. But worth was terrifying. Worth meant having something to lose. "I'll be there," David said quietly. "Isla will be there. Gregory will be there. You won't face this alone. And if they hate it, if Selina is right, and I've been fooling myself all along, then we'll know." David's certainty never wavered. "But I don't believe that will happen. Your art touched someone once, a widower, who bought one of your paintings and wept over it. Your work has power, Mary. The question is whether you're brave enough to let others see it." The night of the exhibition arrived too quickly. Mary stood in the gallery's antechamber, Isla's hands steady on her shoulders, fighting the urge to flee. "I can't do this." "You can." Isla met her eyes in the mirror. "We're Caraway women. We're stronger than we were taught to believe." Through the doorway, Mary could see her paintings hung on cream-colored walls, landscapes and portraits, years of stolen creation, suddenly visible to the world. The room filled with London's art, patrons, critics, whose words could make or break reputations, society members hungry for spectacle. Gregory appeared at her elbow, distinguished in his formal attire. "Your father would burst with pride, Miss Mary. Let them see what he always knew was there." She took a breath, then another. David waited by the entrance, his presence steady as stone. He caught her eye and nodded. You're not alone. Mary stepped into the gallery. The first hour passed in a blur of polite murmurs and curious glances. She stood rigid in the corner, watching faces as they examined her work. Some smiled, some frowned, some moved on quickly. Each reaction felt like judgment, confirmation of her inadequacy. Then Lord Ashford, London's most respected art critic, stopped before her largest piece, the painting of Hartley House's walled garden, roses tangled with wild hope. He studied it for long minutes while Mary's heart threatened to break through her ribs. "Remarkable," he said finally, loud enough for others to hear. "The emotional depth, the technical skill. This reminds me of Constable, but with something uniquely its own." "Who is this artist?" "Miss Mary Carraway," someone answered. "She must accept commissions. I know 3 collectors who would pay handsomely for such work." The room shifted. Others gathered around her paintings, their interest no longer merely polite. Purchase offers were made, commissions requested, praise offered freely, genuinely. It was too much. The walls closed in. The voices became overwhelming. Years of believing she was nothing collided with this moment of validation, and Mary couldn't process the contradiction. She fled to the gallery's small garden, gasping for air. The panic attack hit hard chest tight, vision swimming, Selina's voice drowning out everything else. "You are nothing. This is all a mistake. They'll realize. They'll see the truth." "Mary," David's voice, calm and certain. He sat beside her on the bench, not touching, just present. "I can't," she gasped. "It's too much. They're wrong. They have to be wrong." "What would convince you?" he asked quietly. "What proof would you accept?" "I don't know." Tears streamed down her face. "Maybe nothing. Maybe I'm too broken. Then I'll spend every day for the rest of our lives providing evidence." He turned to face her, and his expression held such tenderness, it hurt. "But I need you to understand something. I'm not rescuing you. I'm not fixing you. I'm loving you. Those are different things." Mary looked at him through her tears. "You're not a project or a charity case," David continued. "You're the woman I choose, the only woman I want. But you have to choose too, Mary. You have to decide if you're brave enough to believe you might be worth loving." The question hung between them, massive and terrifying. What did she want? Not what should she do, not what was proper or safe. What did Mary Carraway want? "I want to believe I'm worth loving," she whispered. "I want to believe I matter. I want you." "Then choose it. Choose to believe. Even if you have to choose it again, tomorrow, and the day after. Choose." Mary drew a shaking breath. "I don't know if I'll ever fully believe it. The voice that tells me I'm nothing, it's still there. But I want to try. I want to choose different." She met his eyes. "Yes, David, I choose you. I choose us. I choose me." He kissed her then, not their first kiss, but different somehow. Not rescue, but partnership. Not salvation, but commitment to the daily work of believing in worth. When they finally drew apart, Isla stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, smiling with fierce joy. 6 months later, Mary stood in her studio, her own studio, in the London townhouse she shared with David, paintbrush in hand, late afternoon sun streaming through tall windows. The canvas before her showed her own face, but not as Selina had taught her to see it. This woman had scars, yes, haunted eyes that still held shadows, but also strength, hope, the courage to keep choosing belief, even when doubt whispered. At the bottom, in careful script, she'd written, "Only me." Still painting, David entered, his daily ritual of watching her create. "Always," she smiled, adding a touch of light to the painted eyes. "I still hear the voice sometimes, the one that says I'm nothing." "And what do you tell it?" "I tell it that it's wrong." Mary set down her brush, turning to face her husband. "And then I paint anyway." Gregory had taken the position of household steward, finally able to fulfill his promise to her father. Isla had married a kind scholar who valued her mind over her beauty. Their sisterhood healed and strengthened. Even news of Selina came occasionally isolated in the countryside, abandoned by the society she'd manipulated for so long. But Mary no longer needed to know Selina was suffering to believe in her own worth. That was the real victory. "Only you, Mary," David said softly, as he did every day. "Only ever you." She turned back to her painting, the woman she was becoming, still scarred but no longer broken, still haunted but no longer imprisoned. The woman who had learned that psychological liberation wasn't a single moment of revelation, but a daily choice to believe. And in choosing to believe in herself, Mary Carraway found something rarer than love, rarer than art, rarer than anything society could offer. She found herself, and discovered she had always been extraordinary. The canvas caught the afternoon light, paint still wet, full of possibility. Tomorrow she would choose again, and the day after, and the day after that. But today she was enough. Mary's story reminds us that our worth isn't determined by those who try to diminish us. It's inherent, waiting to be chosen. If her journey from invisibility to self-belief moved you, let me know in the comments. What was the moment that made you believe she would make it? And if you know someone who needs to hear that they matter, that they're not nothing, share this story with them. Sometimes we all need to be reminded that we're worthy of love, worthy of dreams, worthy of taking up space. Subscribe for more stories of resilience, romance, and women who refuse to stay small, because every voice matters, every story matters. You matter. Until next time, keep choosing to believe in yourself, even when doubt whispers, especially then.